Enterprise's evil Vulcans secretly followed Star Trek, TNG's Klingon retcon. The Star Trek universe has always been a patchwork of evolving ideas, retcons, and subtle shifts in continuity that sometimes feel like a writer's game of cosmic telephone. Perhaps no example of this is more intriguing than the portrayal of Vulcans in Star Trek. Enterprise, particularly the so-called evil Vulcans, who lurk in the shadows, manipulating human events. At first glance, these shadowy figures seem to be a simple addition to the pre-TOS timeline, but when examined closely, their role mirrors an earlier Star Trek retcon, the one applied to Klingons in the Next Generation era, suggesting that the producers were quietly rewriting the Vulcans in much the same way Roddenberry-era Klingons had been reimagined decades earlier. The original series of Star Trek introduced Vulcans as logical, aloof, and emotionally controlled. Spock was the archetype, the enigmatic half-human who guided the crew of the Enterprise with intellect and stoicism. Fast forward to Enterprise, and we find Vulcans behaving in ways that are arguably antagonistic, secretive, and manipulative to a degree that's uncomfortably Machiavellian. Episodes like Kishara and the shadowy machinations of the Vulcan High Command depict a species willing to experiment on humans and withhold critical knowledge to achieve their own ends. These Vulcans are not just aloof, they are morally ambiguous, almost coldly cruel, echoing the way TNG and DS9 later reframed Klingons from the campy, bug-eyed villains of the 1960s into politically complex warriors with honor codes, intrigue, and internal strife. In the original series, Klingons were one-dimensional antagonists, aggressive, loud, and easily defeated by Kirk's charisma and cunning. By the Next Generation, they had been completely reimagined. The Klingons of the 24th century were honorable but complicated, a proud warrior race with political maneuvering, family loyalties, and deep cultural rituals. The writers retroactively infused the Klingon Empire with layers of complexity to make them believable allies, enemies, and narrative drivers. This is the same playbook applied to Vulcans in Enterprise. A species once straightforwardly logical is suddenly fractured, politically charged, and capable of morally questionable deeds. What's fascinating is that this Vulcan retcon doesn't feel arbitrary. It's deeply rooted in Star Trek's long-standing theme of examining ethics, power, and cultural evolution. Just as TNG Klingons allowed writers to explore ideas of honor, betrayal, and diplomacy, Enterprise's manipulative Vulcans explore the tension between logic and emotion, and the ethical limits of control. The shadowy High Command embodies a political system in which knowledge is power, secrecy is a weapon, and the greater good is an ambiguous moral construct. In other words, Enterprise doesn't just make Vulcans evil for shock value, it revisits a familiar pattern in Star Trek, complexified the formerly simple to deepen narrative stakes. There's also a subtle meta-commentary happening. Enterprise was produced in the early 2000s, when Star Trek was navigating the legacy of decades of canon. The show's creative team, writers, producers, and even some of the actors were keenly aware that fans scrutinized continuity with obsessive detail. By introducing morally ambiguous Vulcans, they effectively gave themselves narrative room to explore pre-TOS Earth and Starfleet without being entirely bound by Spock's famously calm and logical demeanor. It's a creative maneuver that mirrors the TNG era's treatment of Klingons. Retcon for narrative flexibility, but do so in a way that respects the established tone and mythology. Even more, the evil Vulcan retcon allows Enterprise to engage in political allegory in a way the original series never could. Whereas TOS used straightforward villains to explore Cold War anxieties, the manipulative Vulcans reflect the murkier ethical dilemmas of the post-9/11 era: espionage, surveillance, preemptive action, and the moral compromises of power. In this sense, the Vulcan High Command becomes a mirror for human institutions, just as the politically complex Klingons of TNG mirror the intricate alliances and rivalries of contemporary global politics. Critics have often dismissed this portrayal of Vulcans as inconsistent, but the parallels to the Klingon retcon suggest a deliberate, strategic choice. The writers of Enterprise were taking an established species and using a prequel framework to retroactively introduce complexity, moral ambiguity, and internal conflict. By doing so, they weren't undermining canon. They were enhancing it, demonstrating how even the most logical beings can be flawed, politically motivated, and capable of deception. In retrospect, the evil Vulcans of Enterprise can be seen as part of a larger pattern in Star Trek storytelling. Take a species that was once simple and morally binary, and reimagine them as multidimensional, culturally rich, and narratively versatile. Just as TNG gave the Klingons depth and intrigue. Enterprise gave the Vulcans mystery and moral ambiguity. Both retcons serve the same goal: to make the Star Trek universe feel lived in, historically layered, and dramatically compelling. So next time you watch Enterprise and find yourself suspicious of Vulcan motives, remember, this isn't a continuity error or a shock tactic. It's Star Trek quietly doing what it has always done, taking the familiar and transforming it into something richer, more nuanced, and more interesting. In other words, the High Command isn't just evil, it's a masterclass in storytelling retcon, a mirror to the very Klingons that once stole our attention, and proof that even logic-driven beings can be surprisingly unpredictable.